My name is Mia Langston, and when my grandmother called me selfish in front of the entire family, I didn't defend myself. I simply reached across the table, handed her the deed transfer for the house she thought someone else had paid for, and said, "You're welcome. It was me. It was always me." So tell me, where are you watching from? Write it in the comments below. And if you've ever been blamed for abandoning someone you were secretly saving, this story is for you. The snow outside my office window in Berlin fell in thin, trembling sheets like the silence before something breaks. I was reviewing investor updates for Q4 when my phone buzzed with a name I hadn't seen in weeks. Mom. For a split second, I hesitated, then I answered. Mia, her voice snapped like dry twigs. You need to come home. Now. Hi to you too, I said cautiously, pulling the phone tighter against my ear. Don't play games. Your grandmother's dying and you're sitting in Europe doing nothing. The words hit like sleet, sharp, stinging, cold. I leaned back in my chair, forcing calm. I've been checking in with the doctor, her condition's stable, and I'm not doing nothing. I live and work here, I can't just— You've always had an excuse, she spat. You've always been selfish. Selfish. That word again. I closed my eyes for a second, gripping the arm of my chair. Mom, I've offered to help in other ways. I can't just leave my company, my employees. You mean your precious little startup? She said mockingly. While your grandmother lies there waiting for someone who clearly doesn't care. I bit my tongue so hard I tasted metal. Where were you when she fell last week? Or when she needed her meds refilled? Harper's been doing everything while you're off speaking at conferences. That's not fair, I snapped. No, what's not fair is that your name gets mentioned in the will but you're never around. Maybe that changes now. There was a pause long enough to hear my own breathing, fast and shallow. Are you threatening me with a will? I asked, voice like cracked ice. I'm telling you to think about what matters, she said sharply, then hung up. I stared at the dark screen for a moment, my jaw clenched so tight it hurt. The sun had vanished behind thick clouds, casting my office in a pewter blue haze. And just like that, my confidence unraveled. I didn't know how long I sat there before finally gathering my things. Berlin in February was brutal, gray skies, skeletal trees, the scent of frozen sidewalks, but it was nothing compared to the cold settling into my chest. By the time I reached my apartment in Kreuzberg, my fingers were numb. I dropped my bag, took off my boots, and stood there in the quiet. The heater hummed softly. My phone lay face down on the counter, like it was ashamed of what it had just delivered. I wanted to scream. Instead, I made tea. I watched the steam rise from the cup and vanish into nothing. And in that silence, the guilt started its familiar crawl up my spine. Not because I'd failed my grandmother, but because I knew I hadn't. I'd been supporting her quietly for months. And no one knew, because I didn't want credit. I just wanted her to be okay. But none of that mattered now. In their eyes, I was the girl who left. The selfish granddaughter in the fancy European apartment. I sat on the edge of my bed, the cup still warm in my hands, and whispered aloud to no one. What else could I have done? I already knew the answer. Nothing, because this wasn't about action, it was about visibility. They couldn't see my sacrifice, so they erased it. The tears didn't come until hours later when I was brushing my teeth of all things, just two quiet ones sliding down without warning. I wiped them away with the back of my sleeve and told myself, "You're not going back, not like this." But the ache stayed, as if I owed them something for daring to live a life they didn't understand. That night, I lay awake listening to the ticking of the radiator and the faint sound of city life outside my window. I stared at the ceiling and wondered, is it really selfish to protect your peace when no one else ever protected yours? Tomorrow, I'd figure it out. But tonight, I just wanted the silence to stop blaming me. It was after midnight when I gave up pretending sleep would come. Berlin was quiet in that strange, metallic way cities get after dark. No cars, no footsteps, just the occasional buzz of the fridge and the brittle hum of my thoughts. I pulled a hoodie over my tank top, padded to the kitchen, and opened the cabinet without really seeing it. Then I saw the chipped mug, the one Harper painted for me in high school. CEO in training, it read in crooked letters. I took that as a sign. I grabbed my phone and sat on the edge of the couch. After a few seconds of hesitation, I tapped Harper's name. It rang once. Twice. Then her tired face filled the screen, illuminated by the blue glow of what I assumed was her bedroom lamp. Mia, her voice was low, confused. It's like 6 a.m. here. I know I couldn't sleep, I said. Did I wake you? A pause. I was up, couldn't sleep either. She looked the same, messy bun, oversized t-shirt, glasses slipping down her nose. There was something comforting in that, even if everything else felt fractured. I talked to Mom, I said. Yeah, I figured. Her tone was unreadable. She thinks I don't care about Grandma, Harper sighed. Well, you are an ocean away, Mia. That doesn't mean I'm absent. Then what does it mean? She asked, crossing her arms. You missed her 80th birthday, you missed the surgery in October, you barely call her. I flinched. I send money. That's not the same. It pays for the things she needs, I argued. But not for what she feels, Harper said sharply. You think wiring a few thousand makes up for years of barely showing up? I looked away, heart clenching. You're always so distant, she added quietly. Even with me. That's not fair, isn't it? The silence stretched. I work non-stop to keep my company afloat, I said, my voice shaking. I've been doing that for years, for her, for everyone. But no one sees that, do they? Harper said, and something in her voice changed, softened maybe. You live in a different world now, Mia. None of us really know what goes on over there. I didn't mean to disappear. Maybe not, she murmured, but you did. Her words hit harder than I wanted them to, not because they were cruel, but because they were probably true. I miss you, I said suddenly. I don't say it enough, but I do. Harper's eyes flickered just briefly. I miss who we were, before everything got so complicated. The ache in my chest deepened. She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, then glanced off-screen. Look, I should get ready. Grandma's nurse comes at 7. Right, I whispered. I'll tell her you called, she offered, but we both knew she wouldn't, or maybe Grandma wouldn't care. Okay, thanks. We lingered there for a second longer, not speaking. Then the call ended. The black screen reflected my own expression, tired, tense, alone. I set the phone down and stared at it for a long while. There was no warmth in that conversation. No clarity either, just confirmation. That no one knew what I was really doing. And maybe that no one cared. They only saw the distance. Not the sacrifice, not the choices behind it. My breath fogged the window as I leaned against the glass, watching the dim orange glow of the street lamps stretch across the snow. I could feel something shifting in me, not breaking, not quite, but crystallizing. I had been doing everything quietly, respectfully, secretly. But maybe silence wasn't the right kind of dignity anymore. I wouldn't beg for recognition. I wouldn't fly back to be the good daughter in a scene that was never mine to control. But I would act, and they'd feel the change before they saw it. I turned back toward the room, the dim light flickering over the clean edges of my minimalist apartment. Everything here had been built from scratch. Every lamp, every line of code, every inch of this life carved with discipline and defiance. This was my world. And now it was time to use it. Morning arrived like a verdict. I hadn't slept, not really. My mind was a blur of spreadsheets and childhood memories, of Harper's voice echoing in my head, "You're always so distant." Maybe she was right. Maybe I had made it easy for them to erase me, but I wasn't going to argue anymore. I'd chosen to build something instead. At 7:32 a.m., I was already at my kitchen table, laptop open, legal pad beside me, black coffee in hand. The sun barely touched the edge of my windows, painting everything a cold gray. But something in me felt steadier now. I logged into a secured portal and stared at the numbers for a long moment. My company, Bridge Lang Systems, had grown quietly but steadily over the last 4 years. I'd started it with 2 friends and a dream: to make healthcare more accessible through intuitive digital platforms. Now, our software served over 24 European clinics. The valuation last quarter was strong enough to make bold decisions, and I was about to make one. At 8:00 a.m. sharp, I clicked into a scheduled Zoom with my legal advisor, Merk Heller, a meticulous, sharp-eyed man in his 50s with the calm of someone who'd seen every kind of mistake money could make. "Mia," he greeted, his tone brisk. "Did you sleep on it?" "Barely," I said, sliding my glasses up my nose. "But I'm ready." Merk blinked, adjusting his tie. "You want to sell how much of your equity?" 20%. His eyebrows rose slightly. "That's significant." "I know, but it's mine to give." He paused. "And the reason for this, bold liquidation," I took a breath. "I want to establish a nonprofit in Florida, health-focused, discreet, fully independent. The funding needs to be immediate and sustained, and the founder must remain anonymous." Merk nodded slowly. "And you trust me to handle this?" "I do. Because I know you'll ask the right questions." He leaned back in his chair. "Then let me start here. What are your terms?" I opened the second tab on my screen. The foundation will be called Sunlight Aid. It'll be based in Sarasota County. I want it to cover medical supplies, prescriptions, home care assistance, and small grants for elderly patients without insurance gaps. Start with a $1 million fund. Let it grow over time, quietly. And your name never touches the paperwork, I said. Not on the documents, not in the registry, not even in whispers. Set it up with a shell board and a public-facing director, someone local, someone clean. I want this to exist without anyone tracing it back to me. Merrick's face softened a bit. This isn't about tax shelters, is it? No, I said, it's about dignity. A silence passed. He scribbled a few notes. Your grandmother? He asked, not unkindly. I looked out the window. She doesn't need to know. None of them do. He nodded once. All right then, I'll draw up the initial structure today. You'll need to approve a third-party agent to oversee the setup. Done, and Merrick? Yes, no leaks, not even in passing, not even to your wife, he chuckled. She doesn't even know I still have a job. A small smile touched my lips, maybe the first in days. I ended the call, heart pounding, but for the first time not from pain, from purpose. This wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about proving anything. It was about taking back the story. Let them believe what they wanted. Let them call me selfish or absent or distant. Let them cast me out of family chats and birthday dinners. Let them write their narrative. I'd write mine, one prescription, one caregiver, one warm meal at a time. And maybe, just maybe, they'd learn to question the miracles that came from nowhere. I reached for my phone, hovered over my grandmother's contact, then pulled back. Not yet. She didn't need my voice right now. She needed help, and I was done waiting for permission to give it. It only took 5 days for the storm to shift. On Wednesday morning, I woke to 7 unread messages in the Langston family chat, which I usually muted and rarely opened. I stared at the screen, still in bed, my body half covered by the gray duvet, Berlin still half asleep outside my window. I expected another round of passive-aggressive digs or vague guilt trips. Instead, I found something odd. Aunt Rachel, I don't know who did this, but Grandma's prescriptions were just fully covered. Even the injections. Those aren't cheap. Harper, wait, what? She said the pharmacy just handled it. Mom, we need to figure out what changed. She got a new home nurse too. Someone showed up from a private agency this morning and said they're assigned indefinitely. Aunt Rachel again, it's a miracle. That's the only explanation. I'm in tears, honestly. I blinked at the phone, my heart starting to race, but not from panic, from satisfaction. It had worked. The paperwork for Sunlight Aid had finalized over the weekend. The director Merrick suggested contact, a warm-voiced woman named Lisa Morales, had already started assessing Grandma's files. And just like I'd instructed, the foundation acted fast. No logos, no letters, no digital trail, just help, just kindness disguised as coincidence. And now the family was spinning in confusion over it. I scrolled down to Harper's message from 10 minutes ago. Harper, she said she thought Medicare finally came through, but this was too fast. I don't think that's it. Then came the cherry on top. Mom, Mia, you didn't hear anything from over there, did you? Europe's always ahead of us on systems like this. I stared at the blinking cursor waiting for my reply. I considered every version of the truth, every blunt mic drop, every crafted phrase that might pull their pride down just a little. But I didn't want that. Not yet. So I typed, Mia, that's wonderful news. That was it, nothing more. Let them think I was just another spectator watching from across the ocean. Let them wonder. I got up, made coffee, and opened the window just slightly, enough to let the sharp winter air cut through the quiet. The city buzzed faintly below. Trams, footsteps, life. Somewhere in Florida, my grandmother was probably sitting at the kitchen table, a fresh set of medications by her side and a caregiver pouring her tea. And I knew that woman. Eliza, her name was trained to listen, to talk when spoken to help with the little things, to treat my grandmother like a woman who mattered. Not an old shadow everyone pretended to care for, but rarely visited. I sank into the couch with my mug, phone face down on the coffee table, the soft hum of the radiator wrapping around me like a second blanket. I'd never felt this kind of satisfaction before. It wasn't loud. It didn't rush. It just sat with me. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel invisible. My work had spoken louder than my presence ever could. Half an hour later, Harper texted me privately. Harper, did you have anything to do with this? I stared at the message for a moment before locking the phone. Let her wonder. Let them all. That was the beauty of anonymous kindness. It made them confront the possibility that something good had happened without them. I finished my coffee slowly, my eyes fixed on the skyline. Somewhere between the snow and the stillness, I allowed myself the smallest smile. Not out of spite, not out of triumph, but because, for once, I had given and not been drained. I had tipped the balance. And no one even saw my hands on the scale. The next morning, I woke with something foreign pressing behind my ribs: hope. Not the fragile, desperate kind I'd learned to tuck away over the years. This was different, quieter, almost dangerous. For days now, I'd kept my head down, letting the charity's actions speak louder than I ever could. Prescriptions delivered, house cleaned, groceries stocked, private nursing care scheduled for 3 days a week. It was working, she was safe. And that should have been enough, but it wasn't, not really. What I wanted, what I suddenly needed, was to hear her voice. To hear something real, maybe even affection if that wasn't too much to ask. Just a hint that beneath the fog of everyone else's opinions, my grandmother still remembered me as hers. I stared at my phone for 10 solid minutes, thumb hovering over her contact. Grandma Jean, no emojis, no nickname, just the name I had never dared change in case she ever saw it. My heart thudded as I finally tapped the green call button. It rang, once, twice, then she answered. Hello, the voice was soft but unmistakably hers, aged and fragile but still carrying the clipped elegance she always wore like perfume. Grandma, I said, trying not to let the emotion slip too fast into my voice. It's Mia. A pause, then, oh Mia, not sweetheart, not baby girl, just my name. A little surprised, a little stiff, I tried to recover. I just wanted to check on you. I heard things have been better lately. With the nurse and the prescriptions. Yes, everything seems to be in order now, she said. Her tone was measured, distant. It's been a relief. That's good, I said, swallowing the dryness in my throat. I'm glad. Another pause, the line crackled faintly. How are things in Europe, she asked, the way someone might ask about weather in a city they've never visited. Busy, I replied. Cold. Well, it's warmer here now. Spring is early. I smiled faintly, trying to find a thread, any thread. Remember when we used to plant begonias by your back porch in March? You let me dig the holes, even when I made a mess of the mulch. I remember, she said, but it landed with the flatness of an automatic reply. I waited, nothing more came. Grandma, I've missed hearing your voice. She hesitated. Well, she said gently but without warmth, that's kind of you to say. Kind. Not I've missed you too, just kind. Something heavy twisted in my stomach. I should rest now, she added, almost as an afterthought. The nurse says I should keep my calls short. Of course, I said quickly. I won't keep you. Thank you for calling, dear, not cold, but not warm either. The call ended before I could respond. Just the dull silence of the Berlin morning wrapping back around me. I set the phone down on the kitchen table and stared at it like it might apologize. It didn't. I sat there for a long time, the warmth of my tea cooling beside me. I had done everything right. Quietly, lovingly, invisibly. And it still wasn't enough. She didn't know it was me who had stepped in. I'd made sure of that, but some part of me thought she'd feel it anyway. That she'd know. That a bond like ours couldn't be erased by distance, or years, or family whispers behind closed doors. But maybe I was wrong. Maybe all those missed birthdays and unanswered texts had stacked up in her heart like debts unpaid. Maybe someone had rewritten my place in her story while I was busy building a life of my own. And now, maybe I was just a voice she used to recognize. I pushed the mug away and stood up, pacing to the window. The city looked the same, indifferent and gray. But inside me, something was hollowing out, something deeper than disappointment. It was the ache of being forgotten. Of realizing that even after giving everything, you could still be a stranger. I leaned my forehead against the cold glass, whispering to no one, why wasn't it enough? The city didn't answer. And neither would she. The boardroom on the 14th floor of our Kreuzberg office was designed to impress. Clean lines, glass walls, chairs that cost more than my first car. Normally, I took pride in this space. This company, this empire I'd built brick by brick from borrowed laptops and late nights. But today, it felt hollow. I sat at the head of the table as Nico, our COO, ran through our Q2 projections with his usual clipped precision. Charts flashed across the screen. Numbers climbed in soft blue lines, applause-worthy growth, and I heard none of it. So if we pushed the Medlink integration by 3 weeks, we still hit the fiscal target. Mia, I blinked. Everyone was looking at me. Nico, seated to my right, leaned in slightly. His voice dropped. Are you okay? I forced a smile tight and automatic. Yes, sorry, jet lag. No one questioned it, except Nico. He studied me a second longer, the concern behind his dark-framed glasses quiet but sharp. As the others returned to their notes, he slid a printed report toward me, the edge brushing my wrist. You missed the beta feedback summary, he murmured. Take it for later. I nodded gratefully, not trusting my voice. The meeting continued, but I barely absorbed the words. I stared out the floor-to-ceiling windows instead, watching as the Berlin skyline stretched across the horizon, sharp and angular beneath a washed-out sky. From up here, everything looked clean, ordered, balanced, and yet I felt like I was unraveling from the inside out. That call with Grandma, it had left something open in me, a quiet wound I couldn't tape shut. She hadn't said anything cruel. She hadn't rejected me outright. But somehow that hurt more. Her politeness, her distance, it was the kind you gave to a neighbor, not a granddaughter. I had given everything I could, and in return I got a voice that barely remembered how to love me. And now, even here, where I was supposed to be sharp, commanding, present, I felt like a paper cut out of myself. Nico wrapped up the presentation and called for a 5-minute break. As the others stretched and checked phones, he turned to me again. You've been off all week, he said quietly. I exhaled, letting the mask slip just a bit. Family stuff, he nodded. Back home. Yeah, you don't have to tell me, he said, then paused. But if you need to step away for a few days. I can't, I cut in too quickly. He didn't push, just gave me a look that said I see you anyway. We both knew I hadn't taken a single full day off in almost 7 months. And we both knew that even if I flew across the Atlantic, I wouldn't be welcomed like a daughter. Just tolerated like a stranger who showed up too late. As the team began regrouping, I pulled my tablet closer and tapped the screen, pretending to scroll through documents. But the screen blurred as my eyes welled, and I blinked it back furiously. Not here, not in front of them. I clenched my fists under the table, grounding myself in the pressure. For years, I'd kept my personal life partitioned off, filed away behind clean lines and quarterly reviews. But now the storm I thought I could manage had found a crack, and it was leaking in. By the end of the meeting, I had no idea what decisions had been finalized. I thanked everyone on autopilot, smiled in the hallway, and retreated to my office with a practiced calm that felt like walking on stilts. Once alone, I closed the door and sat in silence. The snow outside was starting again, small and slow like hesitation. And for the first time since I launched Sunlight Aid, I wondered if anonymity had cost me more than it spared me. Because helping quietly was noble, but it didn't heal the ache of being forgotten. I placed my palms flat on my desk and stared at my reflection in the black glass of the darkened monitor. My hair pulled back, jaw tight, eyes tired, still strong, but something inside was fraying. And if I wasn't careful, I knew exactly where it would break. Sleep had become a stranger. For 3 nights in a row, I'd stared at the ceiling, arms folded across my chest like armor, the same memories running on repeat. Not the dramatic ones, the arguments or slammed doors. No, what haunted me were the quiet, unremarkable ones. The smell of lemon oil and cinnamon in Grandma's kitchen, the way she used to hum while folding towels, the clink of her teacup when she stirred it 3 times, never 2. Her hand on my hair when I sat on the floor doing homework, her voice a soft whisper over my shoulder. You always think too fast, baby. Try listening to the silence sometimes. And then my mother's voice, jagged and cold, piercing through it all like sleet. You've always been selfish. It's not about money, Mia, it's about presence. Don't act like we owe you gratitude for disappearing. The words tangled themselves around my ribs, tightening with each breath I took. By Friday morning, I gave up pretending. I left the apartment at dawn and wandered aimlessly through Kreuzberg's quiet streets, coat collar pulled tight against the wind. Berlin had a way of making you feel anonymous. Sometimes that was comforting. This morning, it was suffocating. By mid-morning, I found myself standing in front of a door I hadn't knocked on in months. Knowles. She opened the door in leggings and a loose sweater, holding a mug of green tea and blinking at me like I was a hallucination. Mia, I didn't say anything, I just stepped in. She didn't ask, she just led me to the couch and handed me her tea. Noel had been my best friend since grad school, a steady, perceptive presence who'd built Bridge Lang with me from the ground up. Where I was fire, she was stone. I often joked she could calm a tornado just by looking at it sideways. I didn't even know where to start. I called her, I said finally. My grandmother. Noel settled into the armchair, legs tucked beneath her. And she was polite, detached. I stared into the tea like it might answer for me. She sounded like I was the lady who used to bag her groceries, not her granddaughter. Noel's face softened. I don't know what I expected, I admitted. But I guess I thought she'd feel me somehow. You wanted her to recognize the love behind the silence, she said quietly. I nodded. And instead, it felt like all the distance became permanent, I added, my throat tightening. Like I spent all this time giving quietly and it didn't plant anything, it just vanished. Noel leaned forward. You're carrying all of this by yourself, Mia. This company, this family wound, the guilt, it's too much, it's pulling you under. I didn't argue. I couldn't. She studied me. What are you afraid would happen if you went back? That no one would care, I said, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. That I'd walk into that house and still be the outsider. That even with all I've done, I'll still be the girl who left and never called enough. She was quiet for a long moment. Then, maybe that's true. Maybe they won't welcome you, but maybe it's not about them anymore. Maybe it's about you facing it. I looked at her, exhausted. And what, just abandon the company mid-growth? Noel didn't blink. I'll run it, she said calmly. What? I've been doing it with you since day one. I know the roadmap. The team trusts me. You've built something amazing, but it won't collapse if you step away. You won't collapse, Mia, if you just give yourself a breath. I stared at her, heart racing. You'd really do that for me, she smiled, not patronizing, just sure. I'd do it with you, that's what partners are for. The flicker in my chest, faint, unfamiliar, was hope. Not the naive kind. Not the fantasy where my family would suddenly hold up signs reading we were wrong, but the kind that said, you're allowed to want more than survival. You're allowed to want closure. I don't even know what I'd say, I whispered. Start with what's true, she said. You don't have to prove anything, just show up. For the first time in weeks, I felt my shoulders lower. I wasn't ready to book the ticket yet. But maybe, just maybe, I could stop pretending the ocean between us wasn't drowning me. The ticket confirmation hit my inbox at 2:14 a.m. I stared at the screen in the blue wash of my laptop, pulse thudding in my ears. It was done. One seat, Berlin to Tampa, with a layover in Charlotte. A return ticket, open-ended. Just in case I didn't know when or if I'd come back. Noel was asleep in the next room, having insisted I spend the night after breaking down in her arms for the third time in a week. She'd cleared her calendar, reassigned key projects, and given me the kind of permission I never thought I needed. To let go. The days that followed were a blur of preparation. I packed lightly. A suitcase, my tablet, the legal binders I couldn't part with, proof of the world I'd built. I left behind the sleek black heels, the tailored blazers. Florida didn't require armor, not yet. On the morning of the flight, Noel drove me to the airport through pale sunlight and half-thawed streets. When she pulled up to the curb, she put the car in park but didn't move to open the door. Call me if you feel yourself falling, she said, eyes steady. Even if it's just to say nothing. I swallowed hard. You're the only person who never makes me explain. That's because I already see you. I hugged her tighter than I'd expected to, and then I left. The plane took off at 10:12 a.m. sharp. I watched Berlin shrink beneath us until it was just clouds, then sky, then silence. Somewhere over the Atlantic, I let myself breathe. For a moment, it felt clean, until my phone vibrated against the tray table. I wasn't supposed to have service yet. But Wi-Fi worked halfway across the ocean, and so did family. One new message, forwarded from Harper, from Mom. Will reading set for Sunday afternoon at the house. Please keep it intimate, only family. From Harper, I thought you were on the list, but Grandma says it's just for family. My eyes blurred as I reread the words, just for family. It took a few seconds to register. I wasn't invited. Not just forgot, excluded. On purpose. My hand gripped the armrest. I stared straight ahead, the cabin noise falling away beneath the roar in my ears. I'd already known where I stood with them. The distant daughter, the successful one, the cold one. But this was a declaration, a public one. It didn't matter what I had done, who I was, what I'd given. I wasn't one of them anymore. I blinked fast and forced my breath to steady. The woman next to me glanced over briefly but said nothing. 1,000 versions of me wanted to cry. To turn the plane around. To never step foot in that house again. But another part, older, quieter, rose up. The part that had funded her care. The part that had built something from nothing. The part that had once sat at Grandma's kitchen table, dreaming big while kneading biscuit dough. I closed my eyes, then whispered to no one, I'll go anyway. Not for them. Not for the will, not even for the closure, for the truth, because I needed to see it with my own eyes what family meant when the mask slipped off. Florida air hit me like a wet cloth, dense, hot, and uninvited. It had been years since I walked through my hometown without headphones, without a schedule, without someone expecting something. But today, I walked with nothing in my hands except a quiet defiance. The law office sat at the edge of a sleepy strip mall, sandwiched between a shuttered dental practice and a chiropractor whose window signs hadn't been updated since 2003. I stood outside for a full minute before opening the door. The receptionist looked up, startled but polite. "Can I help you?" "My name is Mia Langston," I said. "I believe there's a reading of Jean Langston's will happening here today." She hesitated, checked a clipboard, then forced a tight smile. "Yes, they're in the conference room. I wasn't given your name for the guest list." "I'm aware," I said softly. "I'm family." The phrase tasted bitter in my mouth. She led me down a hallway with flickering fluorescents and mismatched carpet tiles. The office smelled like lemon cleaner and old paper. I paused just outside the door, hearing the muffled sound of voices on the other side, some I hadn't heard in years. "I thought she wasn't coming," someone said. I stepped in. Every conversation stopped mid-sentence. 6 faces turned to me, their expressions moving in slow, theatrical sequence. Surprise, then discomfort, then subtle annoyance. The aunts, Harper, my mother. My grandmother, sitting at the head of the table in a pressed blouse and pearls, looked down at the papers in front of her as though they had suddenly become fascinating. I didn't say a word, just nodded politely and slid into an empty chair near the back. "Wow," muttered Aunt Sharon, not quietly enough. "She came all this way." "Must have sensed the money in the air," someone else whispered. I looked at Harper, who met my eyes briefly, then looked away. No one told me to leave. No one offered me a seat closer. And not a single person said, "We're glad you're here." The lawyer entered, a man in his 60s with thinning hair and a folder that looked heavier than it should. "Good afternoon," he said with professional warmth. "Let's begin." As he launched into legal language about final wishes, assets, and property deeds, I let my gaze settle on the woman I'd come all this way to see. My grandmother sat still, her hands folded neatly in her lap, her lips a neutral line. She didn't glance my way once. Not even a flicker. She looked like a stranger in a familiar coat, but I kept my back straight and my eyes clear. I wasn't here to plead, or to explain. I'd done all the giving I could manage. Now I was here to watch. To see who they all really were when they thought I didn't matter. The room was quiet, save for the rustle of pages and the occasional throat clear. Every now and then, someone side-eyed me with poorly concealed irritation, like my very presence disrupted a performance they had rehearsed perfectly. I didn't flinch, I didn't speak. But inside me, a quiet question was building. What would they do when the truth finally cracked through this carefully painted civility? I already knew. And I was ready. The lawyer's voice droned on trusts, medical directives, minor assets. The words barely registered. My attention floated like smoke, wrapping around the cold expressions and tighter than necessary smiles around the table. I sat at the far end, as invisible as they wished I'd stayed, until Grandma spoke. "I want to make something clear," she said, her voice firm, sharp with the elegance of a woman used to being heard. "I've chosen to prioritize the people who have been present in my life, the ones who didn't disappear for years at a time." A ripple of quiet approval passed through the table. She didn't look at me, not once. "I'm grateful to the family members who made time for me, who checked in, who showed up." She picked up her glass of water, her hands steady, her tone colder than the air-conditioned room. "Unlike some people, they didn't vanish to chase success." I stared down at my hands. They were shaking, but I kept them folded neatly in my lap. "Some of you," she continued, and now her voice turned razor-thin, "have given me nothing. No time, no help, just distance. And yet you appear now in a lawyer's office with your suitcase barely unpacked." My heart thudded once, loud and slow, then came the final slice. "You have nothing," she said. "Unlike your cousins who have built real, visible lives here, they didn't run away." The words hit the room like broken glass. I felt the heat before I heard it. A low, breathy laugh. Then another, Aunt Sharon, Aunt Elise, and then Harper, my own sister, giggling behind her hand like it was a sorority roast. I kept my eyes on my grandmother. She didn't blink, didn't flinch. And for a second I thought, maybe she truly doesn't know. Maybe she doesn't realize what I've done, what I've sacrificed, what I've built. But even if she didn't, they did, Harper knew, and still she laughed. My fingers trembled, but I didn't cry. Instead, I did something I hadn't done in 10 years. I stood. And slowly, with legs that felt barely mine, I walked the length of the conference room. My heels sounded too loud against the tile, like a heartbeat on a hospital monitor. No one stopped me. When I reached her, I didn't speak. I simply knelt beside her chair and placed my hand gently over hers. Her skin was soft, thinner than I remembered, still warm. She finally looked at me, not with rage, not even with guilt, just surprise, like I was a memory that had come to life. A moment passed. The laughter quieted. The room stilled. Then the lawyer cleared his throat, adjusting his glasses. "There's something I need to address," he said, voice suddenly more careful. "Before we continue." He glanced down at a file thicker than the rest and then back at my grandmother. "Mrs. Langston, the funding for your current medical coverage, your prescription plan, and this estate planning process has come from an anonymous source. I was instructed to disclose this if a question of contribution was raised." Confused murmurs trickled around the table. The lawyer folded his hands. "I've been authorized to confirm now. That source was Ms. Mia Langston. Her company paid for your care, all of it." The silence that followed could have broken windows. My grandmother's mouth opened slightly. Harper sat back in her chair, color draining from her face. No one moved. And I just stayed kneeling there beside her, my hand still over hers. I didn't look around. I didn't smile. I just whispered for her and only her. I gave quietly. "Because I didn't want to prove anything. I just wanted you to be okay." You could hear the old wall clock ticking above the credenza. Nobody laughed now. The smug faces had gone blank. Aunt Sharon looked like she wanted to melt into the floor. Harper's jaw was tight, her eyes darting toward mine, avoiding my grandmother's face altogether. But I didn't look at any of them, only her. Grandma Jean's hand, still beneath mine, had started to tremble. "I didn't know," she said, barely above a whisper. Her lips parted, then closed again, like she was trying to find words in a language she hadn't spoken in years. Humility. "I didn't know it was you," she continued, her voice cracking at the edges. I assumed," Harper said. She stopped. The room froze on that one word. "Harper." I didn't look back. I didn't need to. Still kneeling beside her chair, I said softly, "I didn't do it for applause." Tears filled her eyes, and this time she didn't try to blink them away. They rolled slowly, breaking the flawless image she'd held onto for so long. "I just wanted you taken care of," I said. "That's all." Her voice came out choked. "Why didn't you tell me?" I looked at her then, really looked. This was the woman who taught me to braid my hair, who slipped notes into my lunchbox until middle school, who whispered bedtime stories from memory when she lost her glasses. That version of her had faded long before today, but I saw a flicker of her now, beneath the pride and the fear of being forgot. "Because I wanted to give," I whispered. "Not prove." She stared at me, then reached up with shaking hands and touched my cheek, the way she hadn't in over a decade. "I was wrong," she said, barely audible. "So wrong." And then, in a room full of people who had dismissed me, who had laughed at me, she turned and said, "The house is yours, Mia." Gasps fluttered across the table. "I want you to have it. You've earned more than any of them ever did. If I could rewrite it all." I stood then. My legs felt steady, my voice didn't shake. "No," I said gently, "I don't want the house." She blinked. "You don't." "I want it to become a guest home," I said, louder now so they could all hear me. "For everyone, for family who actually wants to gather, who shows up." I turned, looking at each of them, one by one. "And maybe," I added, "it'll remind everyone that legacy isn't measured in who gets what, but in who gives when no one's watching." No one dared speak. I stepped back from her chair, and for the first time that day, I didn't feel like an outsider. I felt like the one who'd changed the rules. 3 months later, the house didn't feel like hers or mine. It felt like ours. The transformation was slow at first, then sudden. Once the paperwork was finalized and I officially declined the inheritance, Grandma insisted on being involved in every decision. "I might not be leaving it to you," she'd said, stirring her tea, "but I'm still the matriarch and this porch needs new railings." I didn't argue. That's how we began rebuilding, one railing, one conversation, one unexpected laugh at a time. We called it the Magnolia House. After the old tree in the front yard that somehow kept blooming despite being half split by lightning a decade ago. I thought that was fitting. Now, it was a guest home for visiting family, old friends, and people passing through who needed somewhere safe, quiet, and real. The living room was redesigned with wide open windows and warm oak shelves. The back porch was screened in. furnished with soft chairs, and a long-handled ceiling fan that hummed slow as a lullaby. And the tea, it was always sweet, always strong, and always served in the afternoons, on that same porch where I once sat wondering if I still belonged. Grandma and I sat there now, the spring breeze rustling the magnolia leaves, fresh biscuits cooling on a blue ceramic plate between us. She wore her cardigan draped over her shoulders, her eyes clearer than I'd seen them in years. "No," she said, watching a squirrel dart across the grass. "When I first saw that lawyer open your name in the folder, I thought my heart might stop right there." I smiled faintly. It almost stopped mine, too. "I felt ashamed," she whispered, taking a sip of tea. "Not just for what I said, but for all the space I let fill between us, for letting them convince me you didn't care." "You had reasons to doubt," I replied. "I wasn't always good at reaching out." "That's no excuse," she said firmly. "You needed someone to see you, and I chose the voices closest to me, not the one that mattered most." Her honesty was gentler than an apology. "I'm just glad I came back," I said, setting my cup down, "even if it was late." She reached over and patted my hand. "You weren't late, Mia, you were just right on time for what needed fixing." The screen door creaked behind us. Harper stepped out, holding 2 more glasses of lemonade and a stack of folded napkins. She didn't say much anymore, still careful, still quietly navigating this new space between us. But she showed up every Sunday, helped in the garden, stayed late to wash dishes. It wasn't redemption, but it was effort. "Want me to bring the lemon curd?" she asked. "Please," Grandma said, smiling. As Harper disappeared again, Grandma turned to me and said, "This house isn't just different because of new furniture or fancy paint. It feels warmer because you changed the temperature." I looked out at the garden where tulips bloomed in neat rows. The air smelled like grass and powdered sugar. Peace didn't come loud. It arrived like this, soft, sure, steady. "You healed more than me, Mia," Grandma said. "You healed all the invisible places the rest of us didn't even know were broken." I didn't reply. I just squeezed her hand gently. Sometimes the deepest things don't need saying. 2 years later, I no longer lived in one place. I lived in 2 rhythms. In Berlin, my apartment still overlooked the Spree River, the city humming with its cool efficiency. I returned every few months, consulting part-time with Bridge Lang, advising new founders and mentoring women in tech who, like me, had once believed success meant silence. But my center of gravity had shifted. Most of the time now, I was in Florida. Not the same Florida I'd left behind, tight with judgment and ghosted phone calls. This was a slower, more intentional version, where mornings smelled like coffee and lemon polish, and afternoons stretched out beneath the low shade of the magnolia tree. The house was always full. Cousins came and went. Aunts who once couldn't look me in the eye now brought sweet potato pies and folding chairs. Harper still had her sharp edges, but she softened them lately, offering to watch Grandma when I had Zoom meetings, sometimes asking about Berlin like she meant it. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest. And that made all the difference. Grandma had grown stronger. The home nurse now visited only twice a week. She insisted on preparing her own tea again, properly, she'd joke, and never missed a Sunday chess game on the back lawn. That's where we were now. Under the wide magnolia branches, a soft breeze moving through the leaves like a secret. She sat across from me, her gray curls tucked neatly under a wide-brimmed hat, eyes narrowed at the board. "You always open with the same move," she muttered, sliding a knight forward. "I like what works," I said, nudging a pawn into place. She looked up at me, her smile faint but familiar. "You always were steady," I chuckled. "I thought you called me distant." Her eyes twinkled. "That too, but not anymore." We played in silence for a while, the birds chirping from the fence, the breeze rustling the pages of a forgotten book on the table nearby. "I still don't know how you did it," she said eventually, voice soft. "Did what?" "Gave without needing to be seen." I thought about that for a long moment. "I think I needed to be seen," I admitted. "I just didn't want it from the wrong people." She nodded slowly. And now, I looked around, at the house I'd nearly lost, at the tree that still bloomed, at the woman who had finally looked at me and seen me. "Now," I said, moving my bishop across the board, "I don't need proof, I have peace." She sighed, reached for her queen, and knocked her own king over instead. "Checkmate?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. She grinned. "You know I let you win." I smiled, lifting my cup of tea. Sometimes victory wasn't loud. Sometimes it was a quiet afternoon under a tree beside the person who finally called you home. That was the end of my story. But I keep thinking about Harper, how she stayed silent when I was excluded, but later started showing up, quietly trying to rebuild what she once helped tear down. Did she do the right thing, or was it too little too late? Tell me what you think in the comments. And if my story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay for more stories like mine.